The sound of flesh meeting flesh echoed through the Pentagon's secure briefing room like a gunshot. In that split second, as his hand connected with her cheek, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chen thought he was disciplining an insubordinate junior officer who had questioned his battle strategy in front of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. What he didn't know was that the woman standing before him, the one whose eyes now blazed with a fury that seemed to burn straight through his soul, was Lieutenant Sarah Ghost Morrison, one of the Navy's most lethal and classified weapons. She was a SEAL. Not just any SEAL, but one whose very existence was buried so deep in black operations that even Marcus's top-secret clearance couldn't access her files. As the room fell into a silence so complete you could hear the air conditioning humming, Sarah slowly turned her head back to face him. The red mark on her cheek was already forming, but it was nothing compared to the storm that was about to be unleashed. In the next 72 hours, Marcus would discover that the disrespectful ensign he had just struck was responsible for 17 successful solo infiltration missions behind enemy lines, had eliminated 34 high-value targets without ever being detected, and had single-handedly rescued a captured senator's daughter from a terrorist compound in Syria. More importantly, he was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones standing right beside you, and sometimes they become the only ones who can save your life. This is the story of how one moment of poor judgment in a war room led to the most intense 72 hours of two military careers, and how the line between enemy and ally can disappear faster than a bullet in the dark. The fluorescent lights in Pentagon Conference Room 2E924 cast harsh shadows across the mahogany table where 12 of America's highest-ranking military officials sat reviewing satellite images of a terrorist compound in Afghanistan. The air was thick with tension and the smell of black coffee that had been brewing too long. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chen stood at the head of the room, his laser pointer dancing across aerial photographs as he outlined Operation Desert Phantom, a mission that would determine the fate of 43 American hostages. Marcus had earned his reputation through 15 years of exemplary service, rising through the ranks faster than most due to his strategic mind and unwavering dedication to protocol. His uniform was pristine, every ribbon and medal perfectly aligned, his dark hair cut regulation short. At 38, he commanded respect through a combination of tactical brilliance and old-school military discipline. He tolerated no questioning of authority, no deviation from chain of command, and absolutely no disrespect in front of superior officers. "The compound is situated here," Marcus continued, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had planned dozens of successful operations. "Intelligence suggests the hostages are being held in the Eastern Wing. We'll insert 2 teams at these coordinates, move through the building systematically, and extract the targets within 40 minutes. The room was silent except for the gentle hum of air conditioning and the occasional rustle of papers. Admiral Richardson leaned forward, studying the photographs through wire-rimmed glasses. General Morrison tapped his pen against his notepad, calculating logistics. Colonel Hassan reviewed troop deployment numbers on her tablet. Everyone was focused on the mission details when a voice spoke up from the back corner of the room. "That's a suicide mission." Every head turned toward the source of the interruption. Sitting in a chair that had been positioned slightly away from the main table was someone Marcus had assumed was a junior aide, or perhaps an intelligence analyst. The person wore navy dress blues without any visible rank insignia, had short auburn hair, and possessed an unremarkable appearance that seemed designed to blend into the background. Marcus had barely noticed this individual during the entire briefing. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. The figure stood up slowly, revealing a compact frame and calm green eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "I said it's a suicide mission. You're planning to send 36 Marines into a kill box." Marcus felt heat rising in his face. In 15 years of military service, no one had ever interrupted his briefings, especially not some anonymous staffer who clearly didn't understand proper protocol. "I don't recall asking for input from support personnel. Those satellite images are 3 days old," the woman continued, completely ignoring Marcus's warning tone. "The compound layout has changed. They've moved heavy weapons to the Eastern Wing specifically because they know that's where any rescue attempt would focus. You'll lose half your men before they even reach the building." The room had gone completely quiet. Admiral Richardson was watching the exchange with interest, while General Morrison's expression remained unreadable. Colonel Hassan had stopped writing and was studying both Marcus and the mysterious woman with calculating eyes. Marcus stepped away from the projection screen, his jaw clenched tight. "I'm sorry, but who exactly are you to question battle plans developed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff?" The woman's expression didn't change. Someone who's been inside that compound. That's impossible, Marcus snapped. No American forces have penetrated that facility. No American forces that you know about. The subtle emphasis on you hit Marcus like a physical blow. The implication was clear. There were operations happening beyond his clearance level. Missions he wasn't privy to. Intelligence he hadn't been granted access to. For someone who prided himself on being in complete control of every situation, the suggestion that he was operating with incomplete information was infuriating. Listen here, Marcus said, his voice rising. I don't know what kind of clearance you think you have, but this is a classified briefing for senior officers only. If you have intelligence relevant to this mission, you submit it through proper channels. You don't interrupt operational planning with wild claims and accusations. The woman took a step forward, her green eyes never leaving Marcus's face. 3 days ago, at approximately 0300 hours, someone matching my description was photographed by a security camera 40 feet from where those hostages are being held. The eastern wing has been heavily fortified since then. There are now 4 mounted machine guns covering the approaches you're planning to use, and they've installed motion sensors along the entire perimeter wall. Marcus felt his control slipping. The level of detail in her statement suggested either incredibly sophisticated intelligence gathering or direct reconnaissance. Either way, it meant his carefully planned operation was compromised before it even began. But what infuriated him most was the casual way she had delivered this information, as if she were discussing the weather rather than potentially saving the lives of 36 Marines. Even if what you're saying is true, Marcus said through gritted teeth, there are proper procedures for disseminating intelligence. You don't just stand up in the middle of a briefing and contradict the mission commander. I'm not contradicting you, the woman replied calmly. I'm trying to keep your Marines from walking into an ambush. My Marines know how to handle themselves. Your Marines are going to die if you send them in there with a 3-day-old plan. The exchange had escalated beyond professional disagreement into something more personal. Marcus could feel the eyes of every senior officer in the room watching him, judging his response, evaluating his leadership under pressure. This unknown woman had challenged not just his plan, but his competence, his authority, and his ability to protect his men. She had done it calmly, methodically, and without showing him the respect his rank demanded. You're out of line, Marcus said, his voice now carrying the full weight of command authority. Completely and utterly out of line. The woman's expression finally shifted slightly, one eyebrow raising almost imperceptibly. Am I? You have no rank visible on your uniform. You have no identification badge. You have no business being in this room, let alone questioning operational decisions made by officers with decades of experience. I don't know who you think you are, but you clearly don't understand how the military works. I understand perfectly how the military works. Then you understand that subordinates don't question their superiors in front of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'm not your subordinate.
The 4 words hung in the air like a challenge.
Marcus felt something snap inside him. The combination of professional embarrassment, wounded pride, and sheer frustration at being contradicted by someone who wouldn't even identify herself had pushed him beyond his breaking point. Every principle of leadership he had learned, every lesson about maintaining authority in front of senior officers, every instinct about military hierarchy was screaming at him to reassert control. Without conscious thought, his right hand moved in a swift arc across the space between them. The sound of the slap echoed through the conference room like a gunshot. The woman's head snapped to the side, and a red mark immediately began forming on her left cheek. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the continued humming of the air conditioning system. Marcus immediately knew he had made a catastrophic mistake, even before the woman slowly turned her head back to face him, even before he saw the way her green eyes had gone completely cold, even before he noticed that every other person in the room was staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to horror. He understood that he had just destroyed his career with a single moment of lost control. The woman touched her cheek gently, her fingers coming away with a small trace of blood where his academy ring had caught the skin. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet that everyone in the room had to strain to hear her. Admiral Richardson, she said, her eyes still locked on Marcus's face. Should I show him my credentials now, or would you prefer to handle this situation yourself? Admiral Richardson cleared his throat uncomfortably. Lieutenant Commander Chen, I think you should sit down.
Marcus felt the world tilting beneath his feet.
The use of his full rank, delivered in that particular tone, meant he was about to receive information that would fundamentally change his understanding of the situation.
Sir, The officer you just struck, Admiral Richardson continued slowly, is Lieutenant Sarah Morrison, call sign Ghost, United States Navy SEALs.
Her security clearance is higher than yours. Her mission record is classified at levels you don't have access to, and she has just returned from a solo reconnaissance mission inside the compound you're planning to assault. Marcus felt his legs go weak. SEAL. The word reverberated through his mind like an explosion. He had just struck a Navy SEAL, not just any SEAL, but one whose very presence in this room suggested she was involved in operations so classified that even he, a lieutenant commander with top-secret clearance, wasn't authorized to know about them. Sarah Morrison Ghost continued to stare at him with those cold green eyes. The red mark on her cheek was becoming more pronounced, and Marcus realized with growing horror that he had not only assaulted a superior officer, but he had done it in front of witnesses, who included some of the most powerful people in the American military. Lieutenant Morrison, Admiral Richardson said carefully, what are your recommendations for the mission? Sarah didn't look away from Marcus as she answered. The current plan will result in heavy casualties and mission failure. The compound has been reinforced specifically to counter the type of frontal assault being proposed. However, there is another approach that would allow for successful extraction with minimal risk to American personnel. And what approach is that? A small team insertion through the sewage system, accessing the compound from below. The hostages are being held in a basement level that isn't visible in the satellite imagery. 2 operators could reach them, eliminate the guards, and extract all 43 hostages before the main terrorist force could respond. General Morrison spoke for the first time since the confrontation began. 2 operators? That seems insufficient for a mission of this magnitude.
And Sarah finally looked away from Marcus, turning to address the general. 2 SEAL operators, sir?
We've run similar extractions with smaller teams and achieved complete success. The key is avoiding detection until the extraction is in progress. Marcus stood frozen, trying to process the magnitude of his error. This woman, this SEAL, had been attempting to save the lives of his Marines by sharing intelligence gathered during what must have been an incredibly dangerous solo mission. She had risked her life to obtain information that could prevent an American military disaster, and he had responded by striking her across the face. Colonel Hassan leaned forward in her chair. Lieutenant Morrison, how many of these solo missions have you completed? I'm not authorized to discuss specific operational details, ma'am, but I can confirm that this type of extraction falls within my area of expertise. Marcus realized that everyone in the room except him seemed to understand exactly who Sarah Morrison was and what her presence meant. The casual way the senior officers were speaking to her suggested a level of respect and recognition that came from proven performance in the most dangerous situations imaginable. She wasn't just a SEAL. She was clearly one of the elite operators whose missions were so sensitive that even their existence was classified. Admiral Richardson addressed Marcus directly. Lieutenant Commander, I think you need to understand the gravity of what just occurred here. Yes, sir, Marcus managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Lieutenant Morrison has just spent 72 hours inside enemy territory, gathering intelligence that could save the lives of your Marines and ensure the success of this mission. She has risked her life to provide information that would prevent an American military disaster. And your response was to physically assault her. Marcus felt sick. Sir, I didn't know. What you knew or didn't know is irrelevant. Admiral Richardson interrupted. What matters is that a senior officer lost control and struck a subordinate during an operational briefing. This incident will require a full investigation. Sarah spoke again, her voice still calm despite the growing bruise on her face. Admiral, with respect, we have 43 American hostages whose lives depend on immediate action. Perhaps the investigation could wait until after we've completed the mission. The suggestion caught everyone off guard. Marcus stared at her in amazement. Despite what had just happened, despite being assaulted in front of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, her primary concern was still the success of the mission and the lives of American hostages. Lieutenant Morrison, Admiral Richardson said slowly, are you suggesting that Lieutenant Commander Chen continue as mission commander? No, sir. I'm suggesting that we focus on saving American lives first and deal with disciplinary issues afterward. Marcus felt a strange mixture of gratitude and shame. Sarah Morrison was essentially offering him a way out, a chance to complete the mission before facing the consequences of his actions. But he knew that accepting such an offer would make him appear even weaker in the eyes of the senior officers present. However, Sarah continued, I would recommend that someone with current intelligence about the compound take operational control for this specific mission. The implication was clear. She was suggesting that she lead the mission herself, using the intelligence she had gathered during her solo reconnaissance. Marcus understood that this was likely the best possible outcome for everyone involved. The hostages would be rescued by someone who had actually been inside the compound. His Marines would be led by one of the most elite operators in the American military, and he would avoid the catastrophic failure that would certainly result from proceeding with his original plan. But accepting her leadership would also mean acknowledging that his judgment had been fatally flawed, that his plan would have gotten his men killed, and that the woman he had just struck was far more qualified to command this mission than he was. Admiral Richardson looked around the room at the other senior officers. I think we need to consider Lieutenant Morrison's recommendations very seriously. Marcus knew his career was over. Whether the investigation happened immediately or after the mission, there was no coming back from what he had done. Striking a fellow officer was a court-martial offense under any circumstances, but striking a SEAL who had been trying to save American lives elevated it to something far worse. He would be lucky to avoid prison time, let alone keep his rank. But as he looked at Sarah Morrison, at Ghost, standing there with his handprint red against her cheek, still focused on the mission despite everything that had happened, Marcus realized that his career ending might be the least important consequence of the last 10 minutes. 43 American hostages were depending on decisions made in this room, and 36 Marines were preparing to risk their lives on his orders. For the first time since becoming an officer, Marcus understood that sometimes being a leader means admitting when someone else is more qualified to lead. The question was whether his pride would let him do it. The silence in conference room 2E924 stretched for what felt like an eternity before Admiral Richardson finally spoke. This briefing is suspended. Lieutenant Commander Chen, you will report to my office at 1400 hours. Lieutenant Morrison, please remain behind to discuss mission parameters. Marcus felt the weight of 12 pairs of eyes following him as he gathered his papers with trembling hands. Each step toward the door felt like walking through quicksand. As he reached for the handle, Sarah's voice stopped him cold. Lieutenant Commander. Her tone was professional. But there was something else underneath it that he couldn't identify. When he turned around, she was standing exactly where he had left her, the red mark on her cheek now clearly visible in the harsh fluorescent lighting. The Marines you're worried about, I'll bring them home. The simple statement hit Marcus harder than any reprimand could have. Even after what he had done to her, her first concern was still the safety of his men. He managed a slight nod before escaping into the corridor, where he immediately leaned against the wall and tried to steady his breathing. 3 hours later, Marcus sat in Admiral Richardson's office, staring at a manila folder that contained what the Admiral had described as everything you should have known about Lieutenant Morrison before you opened your mouth. The folder was thick, but most of the pages were heavily redacted with black bars covering names, locations, and operational details. What remained visible told a story that made Marcus's accomplishments seem trivial by comparison. Sarah Morrison had graduated from the Naval Academy at the age of 21, finishing second in her class academically and first in physical performance evaluations. She had completed BUD/S training with scores that, according to the notations in her file, exceeded all previous records in multiple categories. Her instructor evaluations contained words like exceptional, ruthless, and ghost-like, the latter apparently leading to her operational call sign. But it was her mission record that truly revealed the magnitude of Marcus's error. Over the past 8 years, Lieutenant Morrison had completed 47 solo operations behind enemy lines. She had infiltrated terrorist compounds in Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, and Iraq. She had eliminated high-value targets in situations deemed too dangerous for traditional SEAL team operations. Her success rate was 100% and her detection rate was 0. The most recent entry in her file was dated 4 days ago, Operation Nightfall, Solo Reconnaissance of Target Compound, Afghanistan. Primary objective, assess hostage location and defensive capabilities. Secondary objective, identify extraction routes for potential rescue operation. Marcus read the summary of her findings with growing dread. Everything Sarah had said during the briefing was confirmed in clinical, professional language. The compound had been heavily reinforced since the satellite images were taken. The eastern wing was now a kill zone designed specifically to counter American rescue attempts. The original assault plan would have resulted in what the report termed catastrophic casualties with minimal probability of mission success. But there was more. Sarah's reconnaissance had revealed that the hostages were being held in a basement level that wasn't visible in any satellite imagery. She had infiltrated the compound, located all 43 Americans, identified their guards, mapped their exact positions, and discovered a sewage tunnel system that would allow access without detection. She had done all of this alone, in hostile territory, with no backup and no support. Admiral Richardson had been watching Marcus read for several minutes before finally speaking. "Do you understand now why Lieutenant Morrison spoke up during your briefing?" Marcus closed the folder and met the Admiral's steady gaze. "She was trying to save my Marines. She was trying to save your Marines while protecting intelligence-gathering methods that cost significant resources and placed one of our most valuable assets at extreme risk." Lieutenant Morrison spent 3 days in that compound, sleeping 4 hours total, living on energy bars and water she carried in, all to obtain information that would ensure American lives weren't lost unnecessarily. "Sir, I had no idea. That's exactly the problem, Lieutenant Commander." You had no idea, but instead of recognizing that fact, you allowed your ego to override your judgment. When someone with superior intelligence tried to share information that could save lives, you saw it as a challenge to your authority rather than a gift. Marcus felt heat rising in his face again, but this time it was shame rather than anger. "There's no excuse for what I did." "No, there isn't. Striking a fellow officer is a court-martial offense under any circumstances. Striking a SEAL who is attempting to prevent American casualties moves this into territory that could end with you in federal prison." The Admiral opened another folder on his desk. "However, Lieutenant Morrison has made a request regarding the handling of this incident." Marcus felt a flicker of hope mixed with confusion. "What kind of request?" "She's asked that any disciplinary action be delayed until after the completion of Operation Desert Phantom. She believes that your removal from command at this stage would create confusion and potentially endanger the mission." "She's protecting me." The realization came out as barely a whisper. "She's protecting the mission." "But yes, in doing so, she's also giving you an opportunity that you frankly don't deserve." Admiral Richardson leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with an expression that was equal parts disappointment and curiosity. "Tell me, Lieutenant Commander, what do you think you've learned from today's events?" Marcus took a moment to consider the question seriously. "That I allowed pride and ego to cloud my judgment. That I made assumptions about someone based on appearance and perceived rank rather than listening to what they were actually saying. That I responded to a challenge to my plans as if it were a personal attack rather than recognizing it as potentially life-saving intelligence. And that Lieutenant Morrison is a better officer than I am." The Admiral's expression softened slightly. "Perhaps, but she's also an officer with a very specific skill set developed for a very specific type of mission. You have different strengths, Lieutenant Commander. The question is whether you can learn to recognize when someone else's expertise exceeds your own." Marcus nodded slowly. "What happens now?" "Now you're going to do something that will either salvage your career or destroy what's left of it. You're going to work directly with Lieutenant Morrison to finalize operational plans for the hostage rescue. You will treat her with the respect due to a fellow officer and a subject matter expert. You will listen to her recommendations without allowing your ego to interfere. And you will demonstrate that you can put American lives ahead of your personal pride." The Admiral stood up, signaling that the meeting was ending. "Lieutenant Morrison is waiting in conference room 2A932. She's expecting you at 1600 yards to review detailed extraction plans. I suggest you use the next 30 minutes to consider very carefully how you want this conversation to proceed." Marcus rose from his chair, the weight of his mistakes settling heavily on his shoulders. "Admiral, will Lieutenant Morrison be taking operational command of the mission?" "That depends entirely on how the next few hours go, Lieutenant Commander. If you can demonstrate that you're capable of working as part of a team rather than needing to dominate every situation, you may retain command under her guidance. If not, she'll take over completely, and you'll be facing disciplinary action immediately." As Marcus walked through the Pentagon corridors toward conference room 2E932, he found himself thinking about everything he thought he knew about leadership, authority, and military hierarchy. For 15 years, he had operated under the assumption that being in command meant having all the answers, maintaining control of every situation, and never showing weakness or uncertainty in front of subordinates. But Sarah Morrison had shown him a different kind of strength. When faced with his aggressive response to her intelligence, she hadn't backed down or become defensive. She had remained focused on the mission and the lives at stake. When he had struck her in front of senior officers, she had immediately thought about how to minimize the impact on the hostage rescue rather than seeking retribution or personal satisfaction. She had demonstrated the kind of leadership that prioritized results over ego, mission success over personal recognition, and American lives over personal grievances. It was everything Marcus had thought he believed in, but apparently hadn't actually been practicing. Outside conference room 2A932, Marcus paused with his hand on the door handle. Through the small window, he could see Sarah sitting at the conference table, studying what appeared to be hand-drawn maps and diagrams. The bruise on her cheek was more pronounced now, a dark purple mark that would take weeks to fully heal. Every time she looked in a mirror for the next month, she would see evidence of his loss of control. But she was here, ready to work with him despite everything that had happened. Ready to share intelligence that she had risked her life to gather. Ready to help him save the lives of Marines who were under his command. Ready to give him a chance he knew he didn't deserve. Marcus took a deep breath and knocked on the door. "Come in," Sarah called. As he entered the room, Marcus noticed that she had changed from her dress uniform into digital camouflage utilities. The transformation was striking. In her dress blues, she had seemed unremarkable, forgettable, designed to blend into the background. In combat gear, she looked exactly like what she was, a highly trained special operations warrior. "Lieutenant Morrison," Marcus began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Before we start working together," Sarah said, "we need to establish some ground rules." Marcus nodded, preparing himself for whatever conditions she was about to set. "First, what happened in that briefing room stays between us and the people who are present. I don't need the entire Navy knowing that their SEAL teams are having personnel conflicts with regular officers." "Understood. Second, for the duration of this mission, you're going to treat me as an expert consultant rather than a subordinate. You have questions about the intelligence I gathered, you ask them. You have concerns about the operational plan, you voice them. But you don't give me orders, and you don't make unilateral decisions about mission parameters. That seems fair. Third, and this is the most important one," Sarah continued, her green eyes meeting his directly. "If at any point during this mission you feel like your authority is being challenged or your ego is being threatened, you will count to 10 before responding. Because the next time you lose control around me, I won't just stand there and take it." The last statement was delivered in the same calm, professional tone she had used for everything else, but Marcus understood the underlying message clearly. Sarah Morrison had allowed him to strike her once because they were in a room full of senior officers and she was focused on mission success. But if he ever raised a hand to her again, she would respond as the lethal operator she was trained to be. "I understand," Marcus said. "Good. Now let's talk about how we're going to bring those hostages home." For the next 3 hours, Marcus received an education in special operations planning that was unlike anything he had experienced in 15 years of military service. Sarah spread her hand-drawn maps across the table and walked him through every detail of the compound layout, explaining defensive positions, guard rotations, and structural weaknesses with the precision of someone who had memorized every inch of the facility. "The sewage access tunnel runs along this route," she explained, tracing a line with her finger. "It's approximately 200 meters from the perimeter fence to a drainage outlet that's directly beneath the building housing the hostages. The tunnel is just large enough for one person at a time, and the crawl takes approximately 12 minutes. Marcus studied the diagrams, impressed despite himself by the level of detail. "How did you map this so precisely?" 3 days of observation, measurement, and memorization. I couldn't risk taking photographs or making written notes while I was inside the compound." "You memorized all of this?" Sarah looked at him as if the question was slightly strange. "That's what we do, Lieutenant Commander. SEALs are trained to gather and retain intelligence under extreme circumstances. Photographic memory isn't required, but it helps." As they continued planning, Marcus began to understand the vast difference between his conventional military training and Sarah's specialized preparation. She had been taught to operate alone, to make critical decisions without backup or support, to gather intelligence while surrounded by enemies who would torture and kill her if she were discovered. Her calm confidence wasn't arrogance. It was the result of training that prepared her for situations where a single mistake meant death. "The extraction itself will require precise timing," Sarah continued. "The guard rotation changes every 4 hours. We have a 7-minute window where the basement level is monitored by only one guard. If we can neutralize him silently and reach the hostages during that window, we can have all 43 people out of the building before the next guard check." "We?" Marcus asked. Sarah looked up from the maps. "Did Admiral Richardson tell you what my recommendation was for operational command?" He said that would depend on how our meeting went. "My recommendation is that we run this mission together. You handle overall coordination and marine support. I handle infiltration and direct extraction. Your Marines secure the perimeter and provide cover for the withdrawal. I get the hostages out of the compound." Marcus was quiet for several moments, processing the offer, Why would you want to work with me after what happened? Because despite what happened in that briefing room, you're a good officer who cares about his Marines. You made a mistake, a serious one. But your tactical planning is solid, and your men trust you. This mission requires both conventional military coordination and special operations expertise. We both bring something essential to the table. And if I mess up again? Sarah's expression became very serious. Then people die, Lieutenant Commander. American hostages die, and your Marines die, and possibly we die too. So I'm counting on you not to mess up again. The simple directness of her statement hit Marcus harder than any threat or warning could have. Sarah Morrison was offering to trust him with her life and the lives of 43 hostages. Despite the fact that he had physically assaulted her 6 hours earlier, she was giving him an opportunity to prove that he could be the leader his rank suggested he should be. I won't let you down, Marcus said. I know you won't. Because if you were the type of person who would let me down, I wouldn't be making this offer. As evening approached and they finalized mission details, Marcus found himself genuinely impressed by Sarah's operational expertise and strategic thinking. She had anticipated contingencies he hadn't considered, identified risks he hadn't seen, and developed solutions for problems that hadn't occurred to him. Working with her was like having access to a tactical computer that could process dozens of variables simultaneously and produce optimal outcomes. But more importantly, he was beginning to understand the person behind the SEAL reputation. Sarah Morrison was brilliant, dedicated, and absolutely fearless, but she was also remarkably generous in her willingness to trust someone who had given her every reason not to. She could have easily destroyed his career with a single complaint to Admiral Richardson, but instead she was working to ensure that American lives were saved and his Marines returned home safely. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Marcus realized he owed her something more than just professional respect. Lieutenant Morrison, he said, I want to apologize for what happened this morning. Not just because it was unprofessional or because it could end my career, but because it was wrong. You were trying to help, and I responded like a bully. You deserved better from a fellow officer. Sarah paused in gathering her papers and looked at him directly. Apology accepted, Lieutenant Commander. But the real test isn't whether you can apologize after making a mistake. It's whether you can learn from that mistake and become a better leader because of it. And if I can? For the first time since he had met her, Sarah Morrison smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it completely transformed her face. Then maybe we'll make a good team. As they walked out of the conference room together, Marcus understood that the next 24 hours would determine not just the success of the mission, but the entire future direction of his military career. He had been given a second chance by someone who had every right to destroy him instead. The question now was whether he could prove worthy of that trust when lives were hanging in the balance. The Marine compound at Kandahar Airfield buzzed with controlled activity at 0500 hours, as 36 Marines prepared for what their briefing had described as a high-priority hostage extraction with classified operational parameters. Marcus stood before his assembled unit, looking at faces he had trained with, fought alongside, and led through 7 previous successful operations. These were his men, and in 12 hours, he would be asking them to trust his judgment with their lives. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran with scars from 3 combat tours, raised his hand during the initial briefing. Sir, intelligence indicates this compound has been significantly reinforced since our satellite images were taken. What's our confidence level on current defensive positions? Marcus had been dreading this question, because the honest answer would reveal how close he had come to sending these Marines into a suicide mission. Our intelligence has been updated with real-time reconnaissance from specialized assets. The individual responsible for gathering that intelligence will be joining us for detailed tactical planning. A murmur went through the assembled Marines. Specialized assets meant special operations, which usually meant SEALs or Delta Force. For a hostage extraction of this magnitude, it suggested someone with extraordinary qualifications and recent direct access to the target. Sir, Corporal Martinez asked, are we working with a full SEAL team for this operation? We're working with one SEAL operator who has conducted solo reconnaissance of the target facility. The Marines exchanged glances. A solo reconnaissance of a heavily defended terrorist compound was the kind of mission that belonged in action movies, not real military operations. The fact that someone had actually done it and lived to provide intelligence suggested they were about to work with someone whose capabilities were far beyond normal human parameters. When do we meet this operator? Staff Sergeant Rodriguez asked. In approximately 10 minutes. And I want to be very clear about something before that introduction takes place, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-learned experience. This SEAL has risked their life to gather intelligence that will keep you alive during this mission. You will treat this individual with the respect due to a fellow warrior and a subject matter expert. There will be no questioning of credentials, no testing of authority, and no military hierarchy games. Is that understood? Yes, sir, came the unified response. At exactly 0515 hours, Sarah Morrison entered the briefing room wearing full combat gear and carrying equipment that most of the Marines had never seen before. Her appearance was striking not because of any attempt to look impressive, but because everything about her gear and bearing suggested someone who operated at a completely different level than conventional forces. Her rifle was a custom-modified HK-416 with a suppressor and optics package that probably cost more than most Marines made in 6 months. Her body armor was lightweight but comprehensive, designed for mobility rather than protection against heavy weapons. Most notably, she carried almost no visible ammunition or supplies, suggesting someone who expected to complete her mission quickly or not at all. "Marines," Marcus announced. "This is Lieutenant Sarah Morrison, call sign Ghost, United States Navy SEALs. Lieutenant Morrison has just returned from a 3-day solo reconnaissance of our target compound. She will be providing detailed intelligence and leading the direct extraction portion of our mission." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was the first to speak. "Ma'am, with all due respect, how does one person conduct 3 days of reconnaissance inside a heavily defended terrorist compound without being detected?" Sarah set her equipment down and moved to the tactical display screen. "Staff Sergeant, how familiar are you with the concept of hiding in plain sight, Bossum? Somewhat familiar, ma'am? The compound we're targeting houses approximately 200 individuals, including guards, support personnel, and prisoners. In a facility that size, with that many people moving around constantly, one additional person can become effectively invisible if they understand the routines, dress appropriately, and move with purpose." She activated the display screen, showing hand-drawn floor plans that were far more detailed than any satellite imagery could provide. "I spent the first 24 hours outside the perimeter, observing guard rotations, supply deliveries, and personnel patterns. The second day, I entered the facility during a food delivery and remained hidden in storage areas while mapping the interior layout. The third day, I located the hostages and identified the optimal extraction route." Corporal Martinez raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, how did you avoid detection for that long without supplies or backup?" Sarah's expression didn't change, but Marcus noticed she paused for a moment before answering. "SEAL training includes extended periods operating alone behind enemy lines. We're taught to survive on minimal resources while completing complex missions. It's not comfortable, but it's manageable." What she didn't say, Marcus realized, was that surviving 3 days inside a terrorist compound while gathering detailed intelligence was far beyond manageable for any normal human being. It was the kind of achievement that would earn someone a Medal of Honor if it were ever made public. "Lieutenant Morrison," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez said, "what kind of resistance should we expect during the extraction?"
Minimal if we execute properly, Sarah replied, moving to a detailed diagram of the compound.
"The hostages are being held here, in a basement level that's separate from the main guard quarters. During the 4-hour guard rotation cycle, there's a 7-minute window where only one guard is present in the basement. If we can neutralize that guard silently and reach the hostages during that window, we can extract all 43 individuals before anyone realizes they're missing." "And if something goes wrong?" Corporal Davis asked. Sarah looked directly at him. "Then you'll earn your pay, Marine." "The compound houses approximately 40 armed guards with access to heavy weapons. If our insertion is detected, we'll be facing a running firefight while protecting 43 civilians. That's why we're going to make sure nothing goes wrong." For the next 3 hours, Sarah walked the Marines through every aspect of the mission, with a level of detail that impressed even Marcus. She had memorized guard schedules, weapon locations, structural weak points, escape routes, and contingency plans for dozens of potential complications. Her planning was comprehensive enough to account for variables that wouldn't occur to most military strategists. But what struck Marcus most was how she interacted with his Marines. Despite being a SEAL with capabilities they could barely comprehend, she treated them as equals and professionals. She answered their questions thoroughly, asked for their input on tactical details, and incorporated their suggestions into the mission planning when they made sense. "Corporal Martinez," Sarah said during a discussion of perimeter security, "you mentioned concerns about Overwatch positions on the eastern ridge. What would be your recommendation for neutralizing those positions without alerting the main compound?" Martinez straightened up, clearly pleased to be asked for tactical input by a SEAL. "Ma'am, if we could position 2 sniper teams on the ridge approximately 1,000 meters out,
We could take out the Overwatch guards simultaneously and provide cover for the extraction team.
Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, do you have Marines qualified for precision shooting at that range?
Yes, ma'am. Lance Corporals Thompson and Kim both scored expert marksman at 1,200 meters during our last qualification.
Outstanding. That becomes part of our operational plan. As the day progressed, Marcus watched Sarah work with his Marines and began to understand why she had been willing to trust him despite what had happened in the Pentagon. She understood that successful missions required the contributions of everyone involved, not just special operations personnel. She recognized that conventional Marines brought skills and perspectives that were essential for mission success, and she was secure enough in her own abilities to acknowledge when someone else had a better idea. During a break in the planning session, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached Marcus privately. "Sir, I've worked with special operations before, and I've never seen anyone like Lieutenant Morrison. She's planned this mission down to the minute, but she's also incorporated input from every Marine in the unit. That's not normal for special ops personnel." "What do you mean?" "Usually, special operations teams show up, tell us where to position ourselves for support, and handle the primary mission independently. Lieutenant Morrison is treating us like full partners in this operation. She's not just using us for backup, she's incorporating our capabilities into the core mission planning." Marcus nodded, understanding what Rodriguez was observing. Sarah Morrison wasn't just an exceptional special operations warrior. She was an exceptional leader who understood that the best results came from utilizing everyone's strengths rather than trying to accomplish everything alone. During the afternoon equipment check, Marcus had the opportunity to observe Sarah preparing her personal gear, and what he saw was both impressive and slightly unsettling. Her weapons were maintained to a standard that exceeded anything he had seen in conventional forces. Every piece of equipment had been customized for specific operational requirements. Her ammunition was hand-selected for optimal performance. Even her uniform had been modified to eliminate anything that might create noise or reflection. "Lieutenant Morrison," Marcus asked, "how much personal preparation goes into a mission like this?" Sarah looked up from cleaning her rifle, a process that involved far more precision than standard military maintenance. "For a solo operation, I typically spend 4 hours of preparation for every hour of mission time. Equipment checks, mental rehearsal, physical conditioning, contingency planning. The preparation phase is often more important than the execution phase. 4 hours of preparation for every hour of mission time? Minimum. For this mission, with the added complexity of coordinating with a Marine unit, I've spent approximately 30 hours in preparation over the past 2 days." Marcus did the quick calculation and realized that Sarah had been working almost continuously since their confrontation in the Pentagon. While he had been dealing with Admiral Richardson and struggling with the implications for his career, she had been focused entirely on ensuring mission success and Marine safety. "Do you ever take breaks during preparation?" Sarah paused in her rifle maintenance and looked at him with something that might have been amusement. "Lieutenant Commander, when 43 American hostages are depending on your performance, breaks become a luxury you can't afford." As evening approached, the Marines gathered for a final mission briefing. Marcus had conducted dozens of these sessions over his career, but this one felt different. The level of preparation, the quality of intelligence, and the presence of someone with Sarah's capabilities had transformed what should have been a high-risk operation into something that felt almost routine. "Marines," Marcus began, "in approximately 8 hours, we will commence Operation Desert Phantom. Thanks to Lieutenant Morrison's reconnaissance, we have intelligence that is both current and comprehensive. We know exactly where the hostages are located. We know the guard rotations, and we have identified multiple extraction routes." He gestured towards Sarah, who was standing beside the tactical display. "Lieutenant Morrison will be leading the direct extraction team into the compound. Your mission is to provide perimeter security, overwatch, and backup support. This is not a traditional assault operation. We are not going in to engage the enemy unless something goes wrong. Our objective is to get in, extract the hostages, and get out without anyone knowing we were there." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez raised his hand. "Sir, what's our confidence level for mission success?" Marcus looked at Sarah, who stepped forward to answer. "Based on 3 days of direct observation and detailed planning, I assess our probability of successful extraction at approximately 95%. The remaining 5% accounts for variables that are beyond our control, such as unexpected changes in guard schedules or equipment failures." The Marines exchanged glances. A 95% success probability was higher than most of them had ever heard for any military operation, let alone a hostage extraction from a heavily defended compound. "Ma'am," Corporal Davis asked, "what happens if we encounter the 5%? Sarah's expression became very serious. Then we adapt, overcome, and complete the mission anyway. That's what Marines do, and that's what SEALs do. The difference between success and failure in special operations isn't avoiding problems, it's solving problems faster than the enemy can create them. As the briefing concluded and the Marines dispersed to make final preparations, Marcus found himself alone with Sarah for the first time since their planning session had begun. "Lieutenant Morrison," he said, "I want you to know that watching you work with my Marines today has been educational. You've shown me what leadership looks like when it's focused on mission success rather than personal authority." Sarah finished packing her equipment before responding. "Leadership isn't about being in charge, Lieutenant Commander. It's about taking responsibility for outcomes and making sure everyone has what they need to succeed. Is that why you're giving me a chance to prove myself on this mission? I'm giving you a chance because American lives are at stake, and you're the best person available to coordinate the Marine support elements. Personal considerations don't factor into operational decisions." Marcus nodded, understanding that her answer was both completely honest and slightly incomplete. Sarah Morrison could have easily taken full command of the mission and relegated him to a support role, but she had chosen to structure the operation in a way that allowed him to demonstrate leadership and regain the confidence of his Marines.
One more question, Marcus said.
"Tomorrow, when we're in that compound, how do I know you'll be able to trust my judgment after what happened between us?" Sarah shouldered her pack and looked at him directly. "Because tomorrow, when we're in that compound, the only thing that matters is bringing those hostages home alive."
Everything else is just noise.
As she walked away to join the Marines for final equipment checks, Marcus realized that he was about to participate in the most important mission of his career with someone who represented everything he had thought he understood about military excellence, but at a level he had never imagined possible.
In 8 hours, he would discover whether he could live up to the trust she was placing in him and whether he had learned enough from his mistakes to deserve the second chance he had been given. The lives of 43 American hostages and 36 Marines would depend on the answer. The Black Hawk helicopter cut through the pre-dawn darkness over Afghanistan at 200 feet above ground level, flying without lights and maintaining radio silence. In the cabin, 36 Marines sat in full combat gear, their faces painted with camouflage and their weapons secured for insertion. Marcus checked his watch. 0347 hours. In 13 minutes, they would reach the drop zone, and Operation Desert Phantom would begin. Sarah Morrison sat near the helicopter's door, her equipment arranged with the precision of someone who had made similar insertions dozens of times. Unlike the Marines, who carried standard combat loads, her gear was minimal and specialized. Everything she carried had a specific purpose for infiltrating the compound, neutralizing threats silently, and extracting hostages without detection. 5 minutes, the crew chief announced over the helicopter's intercom. Marcus activated his throat microphone to address his Marines one final time before insertion. "Remember, this is a stealth operation. We establish perimeter security and wait for Lieutenant Morrison's signal. No one engages unless directly attacked or ordered to do so. Our job is to provide backup and cover the withdrawal." Through his headset, Marcus heard Sarah's voice, calm and professional. "Lieutenant Commander, I'll be inserting at Alpha Point and proceeding directly to the sewage access tunnel. Estimated time to reach hostages is 30 to 7 minutes. Once I initiate extraction, you'll have approximately 12 minutes to position Marines for covering fire during the withdrawal." "Copy that." "Marines are ready to support." 2 minutes, the crew chief called. Marcus looked at his Marines and saw the controlled tension that preceded every combat operation. These were experienced warriors who had trained extensively for this mission, but they were about to support a type of operation that was beyond their normal experience. Single-operator infiltration was the domain of special forces, and most conventional units never had the opportunity to work with someone of Sarah's capabilities. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez caught Marcus's attention and gave him a thumbs up. The message was clear. The Marines trusted their leadership and were ready to execute their assigned roles. Marcus felt a surge of confidence mixed with responsibility. These men were counting on his coordination and judgment to keep them alive while supporting the most complex mission any of them had ever attempted. 1 minute, prepare for insertion. The helicopter began to descend toward a rocky ravine approximately 2 kilometers from the target compound. The landing zone was barely large enough for the aircraft, surrounded by steep walls that would provide concealment but also limit escape routes if the insertion was detected. Sarah had selected this location specifically because it was the furthest point from the compound that still allowed her to reach the infiltration point within her planned timeline. 30 seconds. Marcus checked his rifle one final time and confirmed that his communications equipment was functioning. For the next several hours, his ability to coordinate Marine movements and respond to Sarah's instructions would determine whether 43 Americans came home alive. "Go! Go!" Go! The Marines moved out of the helicopter in perfect formation, each one knowing exactly where to position themselves for perimeter security. Marcus was the last to exit, and as his boots hit the rocky ground, he felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that marked the beginning of combat operations. The helicopter lifted off immediately, disappearing into the darkness and leaving 37 American military personnel alone in hostile territory. For a moment, the only sounds were the fading rotor noise and the soft shuffle of Marines moving to their assigned positions. Sarah materialized beside Marcus so quietly that he jumped slightly. In the darkness, wearing her specialized gear and moving with practiced stealth, she had become almost invisible, even to someone standing 3 feet away. "Marines are in position," Marcus whispered into his throat microphone. "Copy. I am proceeding to Alpha Objective. Maintain radio silence unless you have urgent traffic." Without another word, Sarah disappeared into the darkness, moving toward the compound with a fluid grace that made no sound and left no visible trace. Marcus watched her go and realized that he was witnessing something extraordinary. A human being who had been trained to operate beyond the normal limitations of stealth, endurance, and tactical capability. For the next 37 minutes, Marcus and his Marines waited in carefully concealed positions around the target compound. Through night vision equipment, they could observe the terrorist facility without being detected. The intelligence Sarah had provided proved to be completely accurate. Guard positions, patrol routes, and defensive emplacements were exactly as she had described them. At 0428 hours, Marcus's communications equipment received a brief coded transmission. "Package located. Proceeding with extraction." Sarah had reached the hostages and was beginning the most dangerous phase of the operation. For the next 12 minutes, she would be moving 43 people through a terrorist compound, relying on stealth and timing to avoid detection. If anything went wrong, the Marines would need to transition immediately from hidden observers to assault troops. Marcus activated his throat microphone to address his sniper teams. "Overwatch 1 and 2, targets are in position. Prepare to engage on my command. Overwatch 1 ready. Overwatch 2 ready." Through his scope, Marcus could see guards posted at various points around the compound perimeter. Lance Corporals Thompson and Kim had positioned themselves to eliminate the most dangerous threats simultaneously if the operation was compromised. Their rifles were aimed at guards who controlled heavy weapons or communication equipment that could alert reinforcements. At 0434 hours, Marcus heard the faint sound of movement from inside the compound. It was so subtle that he almost missed it. The soft scrape of footsteps and whispered voices that indicated people moving carefully through darkened corridors. Sarah was moving the hostages toward the extraction point. "Contact!" came a whispered transmission over Marcus's headset. Sarah's voice was barely audible but carried urgent information. Guard rotation changed. Extra personnel in basement level. Proceeding with alternate extraction route. Marcus felt his heart rate increase. The changing guard rotation meant that Sarah's carefully planned timeline was no longer valid. She was improvising in real time, adjusting her extraction route while moving 43 people through hostile territory. The kind of tactical flexibility required for such adaptation was beyond anything Marcus had experienced in conventional operations. 3 minutes passed without further communication. Marcus strained to detect any signs of activity from inside the compound, but the facility remained apparently quiet. Either Sarah was successfully moving the hostages without detection, or something had gone terribly wrong and she was unable to transmit. At 0439 hours, Marcus's night vision equipment detected movement near the compound's eastern wall. A section of the wall that had appeared solid was sliding open, revealing a drainage outlet that Sarah had identified during her reconnaissance. One by one, figures began emerging from the opening, hostages being guided by a barely visible figure in military gear. "Extraction in progress," Sarah transmitted. "Prepare to cover withdrawal." Marcus watched in amazement as the escape proceeded with clockwork precision. Despite the unexpected complication with guard schedules, Sarah was successfully moving all 43 hostages out of the compound without triggering any alarms. Her alternate extraction route was working perfectly. "Lieutenant Commander," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez whispered over the radio, "we have movement from the main compound. Looks like someone is conducting a head count or inspection." Through his scope, Marcus could see guards moving through the facility with flashlights, apparently conducting some kind of routine check. If they discovered that the hostages were missing, the entire compound would be alerted within minutes. "All Marines prepare for immediate withdrawal." Marcus transmitted. "Overwatch teams maintain targeting on priority guards until hostages reach safe distance." The next 5 minutes unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance between success and disaster. Sarah continued moving hostages away from the compound while guards inside the facility conducted their inspection. The margin for error was measured in seconds. If the guards checked the basement level, where the hostages had been held, the alarm would be raised before everyone could reach safety. Last hostage clear of compound, Sarah transmitted at 0445 hours. Moving to extraction point. Marcus felt a surge of relief, but he knew the mission wasn't over until everyone was safely aboard the extraction helicopters. The hostages still needed to traverse almost 2 kilometers of hostile territory to reach the landing zone, and they would be moving as a group of over 40 people who weren't trained for military operations. This is where it gets complicated, Marcus whispered to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Moving that many people across open ground without detection is going to require perfect coordination. As if responding to his concern, Sarah's voice came over the radio with detailed instructions. Lieutenant Commander, I need your Marines to establish overwatch positions along the withdrawal route. We're moving in 3 groups of 15 people each, with 5-minute intervals between groups. First group is departing now. For the next 25 minutes, Marcus coordinated the most complex movement operation of his career. His Marines repositioned themselves to provide security along the withdrawal route, while Sarah led each group of hostages across terrain that offered minimal concealment. The former hostages moved with remarkable discipline despite their exhaustion and stress, following Sarah's instructions without question. Group 1 at Checkpoint Alpha, Sarah transmitted. Group 2 departing compound. Group 3 ready to move.
Marcus monitored the progress while keeping one eye on the compound behind them.
So far, there were no signs that the hostage's absence had been discovered, but he knew that situation could change at any moment. At 051, just as the third group of hostages reached the halfway point of their withdrawal, Marcus's night vision detected activity from inside the compound. Guards were moving with more urgency, and he could see flashlights being directed towards areas that suggested a search was beginning.
All stations. Compound is showing increased activity, Marcus transmitted.
They may have discovered the hostages are missing. Copy, Sarah responded. Increasing movement speed. Group 3 will reach extraction point in 8 minutes. Roger. Marines are repositioned to cover final approach. As the last group of hostages moved across the final stretch of open ground, Marcus heard the distinctive sound of vehicles starting up inside the compound. The terrorists had discovered the escape and were beginning to organize a pursuit. Contact rear, one of his Marines reported. Vehicles departing compound, heading toward extraction zone. Marcus made a split-second decision that would determine whether the mission ended in success or disaster. Overwatch teams engaged pursuit vehicles. All Marines prepared to provide covering fire for hostage extraction. The night erupted in precisely coordinated violence as Lance Corporals Thompson and Kim opened fire on the lead pursuit vehicle. Their shots were perfectly placed, disabling the vehicle without causing an explosion that would alert additional enemy forces. The second vehicle stopped abruptly as its driver realized they were under attack from concealed positions. Group 3 at extraction point, Sarah transmitted, requesting immediate pickup. Marcus could hear the approaching helicopters even before they became visible. The extraction aircraft appeared exactly on schedule, guided by GPS coordinates that Sarah had provided during mission planning. The pilots were flying without lights, using night vision equipment to navigate to the landing zone. All hostages aboard, Sarah reported 3 minutes later. Extraction complete. As the helicopters lifted off carrying 43 freed Americans, Marcus felt a combination of relief, pride, and amazement that was unlike anything he had experienced in 15 years of military service. They had successfully completed what should have been an impossible mission, rescuing every hostage without losing a single American life. But more importantly, he had learned something fundamental about leadership from watching Sarah Morrison operate under extreme pressure. When faced with unexpected complications, she had adapted instantly without losing focus on the primary objective. When coordination was required among multiple units, she had communicated clearly and efficiently. When split-second decisions meant the difference between success and failure, she had made them without hesitation. Outstanding work, Marines! Marcus transmitted to his unit as they prepared for their own extraction. You've just participated in one of the most successful hostage rescue operations in military history. As Sarah approached his position for the ride home, Marcus realized that the woman he had struck in anger 36 hours earlier had just demonstrated the kind of leadership, tactical excellence, and personal courage that he had spent his entire career trying to develop. Like King Morrison, he said as they waited for their transport, that was the most impressive military operation I've ever witnessed. Sarah removed her night vision equipment and looked at him with those same calm green eyes that had remained focused throughout the entire mission. That was what happens when everyone does their job properly, Lieutenant Commander. Your Marines performed exactly as they were supposed to, and the mission succeeded because of it. Even in the moment of triumph, her first instinct was to credit the Marines rather than accept personal recognition. Marcus understood that this wasn't false modesty or attempt to deflect attention. It was the perspective of someone who genuinely understood that successful operations required the contributions of every person involved. As their extraction helicopter approached the landing zone, Marcus realized that he had learned more about military leadership in the past 36 hours than in the previous 15 years of his career. The question now was whether he could incorporate those lessons into his own approach to command, and whether he could prove himself worthy of serving alongside someone like Sarah Morrison in future operations. The mission was over, but Marcus suspected that his education was just beginning. The debriefing room at Kandahar Airfield felt different than the Pentagon conference room where this story had begun 48 hours earlier. The debriefing room did not work. Instead of the sterile formality of high-ranking officials discussing hypothetical operations, this room contained tired warriors who had just accomplished something extraordinary. 43 American hostages were alive and safe because of decisions made and actions taken by the people sitting around this table. Marcus sat across from Sarah Morrison, studying her face in the harsh fluorescent lighting. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a yellowish purple, but it was still clearly visible. Every time he looked at it, he was reminded of how close he had come to destroying not just his own career, but potentially the lives of everyone they had just rescued. Admiral Richardson had flown to Afghanistan specifically for this debriefing, along with General Morrison and Colonel Hassan from the original Pentagon meeting. Their presence indicated that Operation Desert Phantom was being treated as something far more significant than a routine hostage rescue. Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Richardson began, what you accomplished in the past 24 hours represents one of the most successful special operations missions in recent military history. 43 American civilians who were facing almost certain execution are now safe and en route to medical evaluation in Germany. 0 American casualties. 0 hostage casualties. Complete tactical success. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, still wearing his combat gear from the mission, raised his hand tentatively. Sir, if I may ask, how significant is this operation in the broader context of our current operations in Afghanistan? General Morrison answered, Staff Sergeant, the hostages you rescued included 2 American journalists, a doctor working with refugees, and the daughter of a United States senator. The intelligence value of the operation is significant, but the humanitarian impact is immeasurable. Marcus felt a weight settling on his shoulders as he realized how close he had come to catastrophic failure. If Sarah Morrison hadn't interrupted his briefing with updated intelligence, if Admiral Richardson hadn't forced him to listen to her recommendations, if he had proceeded with his original plan based on outdated satellite imagery, the headlines would have been very different. Instead of a rescue, the world would have witnessed a massacre of American Marines and civilians. Lieutenant Morrison, Admiral Richardson continued, your performance on this mission has been exceptional. Solar reconnaissance of the target facility, real-time intelligence gathering, successful extraction of all hostages, and coordination with conventional forces under extremely challenging circumstances. This operation will serve as a case study for special operations training for years to come.
Sarah's expression remained professionally neutral, but Marcus noticed she shifted slightly in her chair.
Thank you, sir. The mission succeeded because of excellent support from Lieutenant Commander Chen and his Marines. The extraction would not have been possible without precise coordination and professional execution from conventional forces. Even now, in the moment of recognition and praise, her instinct was to share credit rather than accept personal accolades. Marcus was beginning to understand that this wasn't strategic or politically motivated. It was simply how she viewed military operations. Success was always the result of teamwork, regardless of individual contributions. Colonel Hassan leaned forward in her chair. Lieutenant Morrison, your after-action report mentions that guard rotations had changed from your initial reconnaissance. How did you adapt to that complication in real time? Ma'am, SEAL training emphasizes flexibility and contingency planning. I had identified 3 possible extraction routes during reconnaissance. When the primary route became compromised, I shifted to the alternate route without interrupting the hostage movement. And you did this while managing 43 civilians who had been held captive for several weeks? Yes, ma'am. The hostages were remarkably cooperative and disciplined. Their behavior under stress contributed significantly to mission success. Marcus listened to Sarah's responses and realized that she was describing tactical adaptations that would be impossible for most military personnel. Switching extraction routes in the middle of a hostage rescue, while moving dozens of people through hostile territory, required a level of situational awareness and tactical flexibility that was beyond conventional training. Admiral Richardson turned his attention to Marcus. Lieutenant Commander Chen, this operation represents a significant evolution in your tactical approach. Your coordination with special operations assets and adaptation to real-time intelligence updates exceeded expectations. How would you characterize your experience working with Lieutenant Morrison? The question felt loaded with implications beyond its simple wording. Marcus understood that his answer would influence not just how this mission was recorded in official reports, but how his future career would develop. More importantly, he knew that his response would reflect whether he had genuinely learned from the events of the past 48 hours. Sir, working with Lieutenant Morrison has been educational in ways that will influence my approach to military leadership for the rest of my career. She demonstrated that tactical excellence comes from preparation, flexibility, and focusing on mission objectives rather than personal authority. My Marines performed exceptionally because they were working with someone who had earned their respect through competence and professional dedication. Admiral Richardson made a note on his tablet before continuing. Lieutenant Commander, you mentioned that this experience has influenced your approach to leadership. Can you elaborate on that? Marcus felt the weight of the question and the attention of everyone in the room. This was his opportunity to demonstrate whether he had learned anything meaningful from his mistakes, or whether he would continue operating with the same assumptions that had merely led to disaster. Sir, I learned that effective leadership requires recognizing when someone else has superior expertise and incorporating that expertise into operational planning. I learned that questioning your tactical assumptions isn't insubordination. It's essential for mission success. Most importantly, I learned that protecting your authority is less important than protecting your people. The room was quiet for several moments before Sarah spoke. Admiral Richardson, if I may add something about Lieutenant Commander Chen's performance during this mission. Please proceed, Lieutenant Morrison. Lieutenant Commander Chen demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership that special operations missions require from conventional forces. He coordinated Marine movements with precision, adapted to changing circumstances without hesitation, and maintained clear communication throughout the operation. His performance was instrumental in mission success. Marcus stared at Sarah in amazement. After everything that had happened, after the way he had treated her in the Pentagon, she was publicly praising his leadership and giving him credit for mission success. It would have been easy for her to accept all the recognition for the rescue, but instead, she was ensuring that his role was acknowledged and appreciated. General Morrison addressed the room generally. This operation demonstrates the potential for enhanced cooperation between special operations assets and conventional forces. The combination of specialized reconnaissance capabilities and conventional military support proved highly effective. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez spoke up again. Sir, speaking for the Marines who participated in this mission, working with Lieutenant Morrison was unlike any operation we've previously experienced. Her planning was comprehensive, her communication was clear, and her tactical expertise made us all better at our jobs. Other Marines nodded in agreement. Marcus realized that Sarah had not only earned the respect of his unit, but had actually improved their capabilities through her approach to mission planning and execution. They had learned techniques and tactical concepts that would make them more effective in future operations. Admiral Richardson closed his folder and addressed the room formally. Operation Desert Phantom is now classified at the highest levels. The details of this mission are not to be discussed outside of official channels. The success of this operation reflects exceptional performance by all personnel involved. As the formal debriefing concluded and people began to disperse, Marcus found himself alone with Sarah for the first time since the mission ended. The contrast between this moment and their first meeting in the Pentagon was striking. Instead of confrontation and misunderstanding, there was mutual respect and shared accomplishment. Lieutenant Morrison, Marcus began, I need you to know that what happened in that Pentagon conference room was the worst mistake of my military career. Not just because it was unprofessional, but because it could have prevented the intelligence sharing that saved American lives. Sarah looked at him directly, her green eyes reflecting the overhead lighting. Lieutenant Commander, what matters is what you learned from that mistake and how you applied those lessons during the mission. Your leadership during the extraction was exactly what the situation required. You're being generous, I'm being accurate. Leadership isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about learning from them and performing better when it matters most. Marcus nodded, understanding that her perspective came from someone who had made life and death decisions in situations where there was no room for error. What happens now? With us, I mean. With our careers after this mission. Sarah was quiet for a moment before answering. That depends on what you want to happen. This mission has opened possibilities that weren't available before. What kind of possibilities? The Pentagon is developing a new program for integrated special operations and conventional force missions. Operations that combine SEAL reconnaissance capabilities with marine assault expertise. They're looking for conventional officers who understand how to work effectively with special operations assets. Marcus felt a surge of excitement mixed with uncertainty. And you think I might qualify for something like that? I think you've demonstrated the kind of tactical flexibility and ego management that such operations require. The question is whether you're interested in that kind of assignment. Working with special operations teams on a regular basis? Working with me, specifically. They want to formalize the partnership we developed for this mission. Marcus stared at her, trying to process the implications of what she was suggesting. You're saying that the military wants us to continue working together? I'm saying that what we accomplished in the past 48 hours has proven that conventional officers and special operations personnel can achieve results that neither could accomplish alone. The military wants to explore that potential further. And what do you think about that? Sarah's expression became thoughtful. I think you've shown that you can learn from mistakes and adapt your leadership style based on new information. I think you understand the value of tactical expertise over personal authority. Most importantly, I think you genuinely care about bringing your Marines home alive. Is that enough for the kind of partnership you're describing? It's everything that's required for the kind of partnership I'm describing. As they prepared to leave the debriefing room, Marcus realized that his military career was about to take a direction he never could have imagined. The woman he had struck in anger 2 days earlier was offering him the opportunity to work at the highest levels of special operations, where the missions would be more dangerous and the stakes would be higher than anything he had previously experienced. Lieutenant Morrison, he said as they reached the door, if we do this, if we continue working together, I need you to know that I will never let my ego interfere with mission success again. Sarah paused, with her hand on the door handle. Lieutenant Commander, if we do this, your ego won't be the challenge. The challenge will be learning to operate at a level where the margin for error is measured in microseconds and the consequences of failure are measured in American lives. Do you think I can handle that kind of pressure? I